this box, to examine the terrors. And you say to them, look, you're suffering from terrors. They don't want to tell you because they tell you and the terror gets worse, because that's what they've learned as children. Don't say you're a bad dad. Don't say you should never have done this, dad. If they verbalize any of this self-assertion, it's the worse for them. That's what they've learned, and you have to unlearn them. You have to say, sit the abuser over there and say, well, what you did was wrong. I'm going to stop you doing it again. And I can't remember the other one. But that's what you have to do. You have to re-energize the social organ to be a social organ. And everybody knows that children are impressionable. Well, they're impressionable with respect to emotional education. They're impressionable with respect to human relationships. All mums shout at them, all women shout at them because mum shouted at me. Wrong. All dads drink and beat people up because my dad drank and beat people up. Wrong. You have to re-educate it. And the problem, as I've tried to describe here on the main sheet, which is not in the main pack, is that this denial confuses the medical approach. You go to the doctor, you say, I've got this terrible pain in my leg, doctor. And he says, did you fall over? He said, oh, yes. Well, it probably broke your leg, right? You tell him the problem, and you tell him the history. You go in there and say, I've got this terrible migraine. Is it because you're upset with your dad? Don't talk about my dad. So they are denying, they're not telling themselves what the main problem is. So how can the doctor work it out? Because you're not giving the most important emotional fact in your life because you're not telling yourself. And you're not telling yourself because it's too dangerous. The breakthrough I had was in 1986. 19 years in general practice looking. 19 years in general practice saying, so what happened as a child? What's your relationship with your parents now? It's something to do with childhood. What is it? And I talked to this woman. I gave her special sessions, 33 special sessions. She was grossly obese, high blood pressure, clearly very stressed. And I wanted to find out what it was. And on the 33rd session, Wednesday, September the 11th, 1986, she said, did I ever tell you the time when I was 6, she's now 40, the time when I was 6, my mother took me upstairs to the bedroom, put the furniture up against the door, and my father came up the stairs afterwards with a hatchet. And he banged holes in the door and said, I'll bloody kill you all. And then he collapsed because he was drunk. And I said, no, I don't think he did. And I undid all my training in psychotherapy because the one thing they tell you is do not make a bad interpretation. I say do not stress the patient. Be very careful what you say. So I said, breaking all those rules, you are terrified of your father killing you today because the hatchet was still over her head. Now, father had been dead 4 years and I couldn't understand why this would be the case. But what happens with trauma is the child freezes at that age. So at the age of 6, this woman had never changed. And we were trying to work it out. I didn't know how it worked at all. I was trying to work it. And she said, the hatch is still there, you fool, at one stage. And it was, and it wasn't. And my task was to reach over and say, you're safe to discuss the hatchet. I'm offering you support so the hatchet is no longer there. Now, once the trauma is put into its real context, and you grow up emotionally, having been frozen at 2 or 6 or whatever the infant age is, the symptoms are cured. They go 100%. And that applies to bipolar, it applies to delusions, hallucinations, psychosis, personality disorders by the bucket load. If you can cure psychopaths, you can cure anybody in a prison setting where it's coercion 100%. I'm run out of things to say. When I was a medical student, we used to say, a doctor slaps on a diagnosis of psychopath when the treatment isn't working. The definition of psychopath was untreatable. That was when I was a medical student. And when the prisons inspector report came round and the inmates told the rest of the team that this was the best wing in the whole prison system because it was a friendly place, the psychiatrist called me out of a meeting and said, this notion that there's any improvement in behavior is anecdotal. And I later read a book written by him, and he said all psychopaths are incurable. It's a psychiatric dogma, which I mention in here, that the psychopaths are the least dogmatically purblind. Schizophrenia and psychosis is alleged to be incurable. It is not. In general practice, find it's an episodic disease. Anybody put under sufficient stress breaks down in a psychotic way, and anybody given sufficient support stops being psychotic. If you give them drugs which dulls their social organ, what can you expect? But you give them social support, as I've been talking about, then the social organ starts and they reintegrate. Psychosis and psychopathy are not incurable. When I discussed this exact problem with Robert Whittaker, I said, what is the answer? He said, a consumer movement.
Yes.
So if the Soteria network is the one I focus on, because I gather there isn't a Soteria house in this country, but that works. It could be non-medical in that sense, and there's a crying need for it, and it works. And once it starts working, then you would be...
But there are moves for alternatives.
But it's not quick enough.
There's a project going to happen in Cambridge.
It's just not quick enough.
The psychiatric profession and the psychopharmaceutics are very powerful.
Very.
And they do not want to listen to my message. They prefer to shoot the messenger, which they do on a regular basis. But it doesn't mean I'm wrong, and it doesn't mean that the reality is that we are human beings and we have mental strengths. Go for it.
Could you explain a bit what the Soteria system is, and how you see that maybe unfolding in this country? I'm a carer. My son has schizophrenia for 10 years. I remember the psychiatrist telling me there was no cure for schizophrenia, which I believed at the time, and I'm a bit upset about that.
Good.
But I've read your books. I thought they were brilliant. I very much identify with what you're doing. I'm part of a community support group in Brighton called Inner Vision, which is a community mental health support group.
Excellent.
I'm not trained professionally in any way in
Good.
psychology, but
It is good.
but I work in alternative health in terms of alternative. I'm part of the alternative health or wellness revolution in terms of general supplementation diet. But I wanted to know, what are the ways forward? We have quite a good community support group. We actually even go back into mental health hospitals and play music and things like that, workshops.
Excellent.
And we also create a community support outside. But where do we go? Because we're not trained, and there is obviously people are vulnerable. So how can we go forward in terms of offering solutions or pathways to recovery without sort of getting people into trouble or hurting?
I see it myself, as I say, as a parallel thing. I've tried to go through the front door of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and I can't get through the front door. They're not interested. I gave a demonstration with videos of a prisoner in denial and overcoming denial in 1994. There were 100 psychiatrists in the room. You could have heard a pin drop, and they were fascinated. Nothing came of that. So they know what I'm working at, but it is so diametrically opposed to the model that they're now using. Not that they were when I was trained in 63. 63, there was courtesy, there was expectation, there was optimism, and there was a therapeutic community approach. But that's been died for a number of reasons. Probably Professor Healy will know more about the reasons why than I do, but it's died, and it needs reviving. And if the psychiatrists won't revive it, then the consumers must revive it, because it's a human, it's the human condition, and we need emotional support.
So how do we do that practically?
You start. I mean, the Soteria people have a lot of experience on this. They obviously need funding, they need an organisation, and they need support. The Soteria, of course, is residential, and that has certain sort of handicaps to it. I'm working on a system which may, in fact, get more emotional support centres, which is what I'm talking about. And there you get recoverers helping others recover. But they have to have recovered. They have to have opened their particular black box, their problems, so that they no longer have the fears of the people coming in.
Can I say something? There is a Soteria network in this country, but it's just a sort of loose collection of people, isn't it, trying to promote the idea. It hasn't actually been translated into a facility. I've myself approached a number of private providers to see if any would be interested in setting up some sort of residential unit or having a ward where, the focus was on minimising medication and trying to support people with other means. I haven't yet had any takers, but I'm still hopeful that maybe in the future with the increasing role of private providers, that might be possible. But the one thing that would be needed is to demonstrate that there are enough people that would want that.
See, consumer movement, vote for it.
Can we just, that young lady's had her hand up for quite a while.
Sorry, I don't think it's very important, but I was just wondering how you thought one could reassert themselves again I picked up on that. And how you thought that people were dangerous to themselves, because just to explain it a little bit, not to think that everyone is a danger to themselves. So when you said you were a danger to yourself, why you think that? Like.
Well, to take the assertion, in one of these phrases I've got, pull yourself together, you've done that, and you need help with pulling the bits together that you can't pull. So it's that bit that you can't pull yourself together, and the reason is that you are still fixed. I'm continually staggered by the impact of trauma. I'm treating a very, very challenging person at the moment, and her dad left when she was 2, and I keep forgetting that she has the emotions of a 2-year-old. I will kill myself because my dad isn't there. Now she's 30. But that is the operative emotional drive to her suicidality, which is profuse. So you have to get that. She can't get that herself because she has not had the support, in that case, for coping with her father's departure. And the traumas are legion, and people need support, and the remedy for trauma is support.
The chap.
Yeah, I've worked in education. Before I retired, I worked with most disaffected young people in London, in Tower Hamlets, in the East End. And what you were talking about, this unit that you worked in, I worked in places that have been called units, pupil referral units, all these alternative approaches to education. Now, I think you mentioned politics or political system. Needs to be a whole change because these kids are obviously failed in school because the system is failing them in school. Now, they come to a small unit. There's a small, 4 teachers, 24 pupils. Now, we get to know the kids. We respect them. We approach the education of these young people in a totally different way. But, the funding on these units are pulled when they become successful. That's a similar sort of thing that seems to have happened with you. Yeah. So, I mean, if the whole education system, my opinion is that it's failing. Not just these pupils are the most damaged, most disaffected, but many of the pupils in schools don't reach their full potential because the whole system is
There's
wrong.
very clear evidence, and it's been out in the public domain for a very long time. There was a project in Detroit, similar to Head Start, where they took 3 to 5-year-old children and gave them what I would call super play school for 3 afternoons a week. They said, now what would you like to do today? They were using the interaction to empower the children to decide that what they said mattered. You listen to most of the stories of what they say doesn't matter. They have no social levers. And the people in the target group, as against the control group, were 5 times better in all respects. Less crime, more stable marriages, the whole caboodle. The emotional education of infants is where it must start. And I wouldn't be at all opposed to voluntary parenting coaching, because these children can be beastly. But if you restore the parent-child support, then you will head off decades of problems. I'll just be a bit more radical again. All crime, in my view, is revenge for childhood injustice. We'll put that in part of the smoking. One over here?
Yep. Yeah. This.
How many catatonic schizophrenics have you seen?
Not many.
No. They're very much fewer now than they were. A lot of the pictures of insanity derive from late syphilitic infections. The notion that I'm Jesus Christ, general paralysis of the insane. So there's a lot of problems. I've seen, I think, 1 catatonic. But the whole thing is the social atmosphere that you provide. In chapter 3 of this book, I start with a conversation I had with a medical friend of mine on the Isle of Wight. I said, I'm writing this book on curing schizophrenia. He said, it's not curable. I said, oh, really? No, because his lecturer said to him, when he's a student, if I woke up with hallucinations, I would kill myself. Now, as a general practitioner, I started off